What's up, everyone? We're here to lead you through our final exercise called Open Source Collaboration. In this exercise, we'll be collaborating on the same repository. However, one difference between this exercise and the previous developer team collaboration exercise is that previously all members of the developer team had access to the same repository. Whereas in this case, we're going to model an open source workflow where I have access to the repository, but Reed doesn't. Reed is going to contribute to the repository without having write access to it. So one major difference is that Reed's going to fork or make a copy of the repository before doing the similar flow that we walked through before. Before we jump into it, let's give an exercise walkthrough. All right, here we are in the open source collaboration exercise. In this exercise, we're going to adopt and practice a pull request workflow to collaborate with people you don't know on open source projects where you don't have write access to the repository. So I will be an open source maintainer. I will be the owner of a given repository, and Reed will be a contributor to that repository. Let's do a quick walkthrough of the process. I have created a repo that we'll be using as the upstream repository. The upstream repository is the one that I own that is like the original source of the code. So Reed is going to fork my repository to make a copy under his own control. And for him, this is the origin repo. When you're working within your own repository, origin is the address. And so from Reed's perspective, his repository is going to be the origin repo, and my repository is going to be the upstream repo. So just a little terminology note for you there. That's the main difference, one of the main differences between open source collaboration and developer team collaboration. Now we'll walk through the same kind of flow where Reed will download his repository onto his computer. He'll check out a new feature branch. He'll make some local development edits to that code. He'll push his code up to GitHub, and finally, he'll create a pull request, not to his own repository, but to the upstream repository that I own. And he'll wait for a maintainer of the upstream repository, in other words, me, to review and merge his code. And then we'll go through the process of syncing Reed's repo after his changes have been pulled into the upstream repo. Okay, so that's a quick, maybe too quick, high level walkthrough of the process, but we're going to get into the details here with you now. So, for the purposes of this exercise, I've created a repository under my own control, and it is called the Open Source Collaboration Exercise. So, this is the upstream repo owned by my username. So, now I'm going to hand it over to Reed to work through some of the next steps in the process here.
What we will notice here is I have the same tab pulled open, the same repository, and I'll make a quick note that even if a repository is public, that means that I can see their code. But even if a repository is public, that doesn't mean I can, as Professor Rossetti was saying, I can't write to that repo directly. That's why we have this forking process to where if this was private, I couldn't even see the code here. Because it's public, I can see the code, but I have to do this extra step to actually be able to contribute to the code. And that step is clicking this fork button. And this is going to make my own copy of the repository that is actually linked to this upstream repository itself so that I can make code changes on my fork of the code. And then when I go and submit a pull request, I'll be asking to actually change the original upstream repository itself. So I'm going to first go ahead and create a new fork. I'll leave it as the same repository name, and I'll click Create Fork. And then what this will do is it's going to create my version of this repository in my account that once again, I can use GitHub Desktop to pull onto my own laptop. So I'm going to navigate over to GitHub Desktop, and I'm going to clone a repository. I'm going to refresh this here. to make sure I have this one, and I'm going to search for open source collaboration exercise 2025. You'll notice that this has this little fork icon. Um, that indicates that it is not my repository, but it's a fork of a public repository. And I'm going to use this local path that I like to put all of my dev projects in, and I'm going to go ahead and click clone.
Here we see when Reed has forked this repository using GitHub Desktop, it's asking his intent for using this repository. And so if the intent is to contribute back to the upstream repo, which it is in this case, we'll select the first option. But sometimes you can just make a fork or a copy of a repository and maybe not intend to propose changes to it. And in that case, you would choose the second option. But we're going to choose the first option here.
Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and click continue. And now what I can do is I can actually create my own branch. And this is my own copy of this repository. And just as a refresher, you can create a branch by clicking this toggle drop-down menu um, and clicking this new branch. And I'm going to give it a name of read uh, my markdown file. This can be whatever we want it to be. In this pull request, we're just going to simulate me adding a single markdown file with my name. And I'm going to go ahead and click create branch. Okay, so now I've created this branch and I'm going to now navigate over to VS Code so I can actually open the coding files on this branch and make my changes. So I'm going to navigate over to VS Code. I'm going to click open, dev projects, and the folder that we just cloned from GitHub. I'm going to go ahead and click open. And what we'll see here is we'll see this single README markdown file that's all of the code contents of the repository at this state. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, and I'm just going to call it read.md. I'm going to hit enter. And here, I'm just going to put my markdown file. And then underneath it, I'll put my GitHub username is @readULike, something like that. Once I've made these code changes and I'm happy with what's in this markdown file, I'm going to navigate back over to GitHub Desktop, and it'll tell me that I've changed one file. And just as before with developer collaboration exercises, the process here is the same. I'm going to make sure this file is selected, and my commit message that's required is going to be created my own markdown file. And then I'm going to commit to this branch. I'm going to make a commit on my local laptop, and I'm going to click commit. And now we'll see that there are no local changes because I just went ahead and made that commit. So Git has tracked the changes, the file I just created, and the lines of text that I put in that file. Now what I need to do is I need to push this branch back up to GitHub. And to do that, I'm going to click on this publish branch button the same way I did before. And when I click publish branch, this is going to put it in my forked repository on GitHub. And now I can navigate back over to GitHub. And we'll notice that on this page, it says this branch had recent pushes 3 seconds ago, where I can go ahead and click compare and pull request. Here we'll notice a little bit different than what we observed before. Before, the only options we had were base and compare. Now we're getting options for what repository we're actually wanting to make this code change in. And so we'll notice here that I'm requesting to merge from my fork of the repository. I know that because it's my username. This branch, read my markdown file, into the main branch of the source, the upstream repository. And so this is the extra option and the extra step required to contribute to open source. I can't modify directly the repository that I don't have direct access to, even if it's public. But because it's public, I can create a fork, make changes on my own version of the repository, and it's still linked with this forking procedure back to the original repository. So this looks good. Generally, if you're contributing open source, you probably want a little bit of a detailed description, a little bit of a detailed title. And so I'll go ahead and say I added my own markdown file to the repository. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and create pull request. And I'll pass control back over to Professor Rossetti.
All right, awesome. So, as a maintainer of this upstream repository, once someone submits a pull request, I will get a notification via email, or whenever I look at the repository, I will now see that pull request. And so, as the maintainer, it's my responsibility to review that pull request. So, I'm going to get into it. So, here I'm looking at my copy of this repository, the upstream repository, and I see that there is an outstanding pull request here from the pull request tab. So I'll navigate over to it and click on the pull request that Reed created. And just like we showed before, I have the ability to now provide my own review of this pull request. And so I will look at the files change tab and go through all the different files that may be changed. This looks good to me. So I'm going to approve this pull request. If we needed to go back and forth and further discuss any of the proposed code, we can comment about that here, like maybe a question about the code. Let's consider doing this instead. And that might prompt Reed to push a new commit to his branch. Any new commits that Reed pushes to that same branch he was working on will update this pull request. And so we might go back and forth a little bit to make sure the code looks good. And then once I'm satisfied as the maintainer of this open source repository, I will merge the pull request. So now I'll give my review. I'll review all the changes in all the files. And here I will approve these changes. Looks good to me with a thumbs up or some kind of fun emoji. All right. And finally, click to submit the review. Going through that formal review is not the most necessary. As long as it looks good to me, I can merge at any time. However, some repositories have restrictions that require a review to happen before the pull request is merged. So I'm going to merge this pull request. I like to use the squash and merge strategy in case there's multiple commits. It'll roll it all up into one. And we can optionally change the commit message, but I think that looks fine. And so now I'm going to confirm this merge. Awesome. So we see the green turn to purple. This pull request has been merged. And now in the upstream repository, when we look at the code on the main branch, we see that it reflects the pull request that was just merged. We see this commit in the history, and we see that new file. So from my perspective as the upstream maintainer, this code is up to date, but the final step in this process will be for Reed as a contributor to refresh his fork to make sure that he can make future changes as well. So I'm going to hand it back over to Reed for the final step in this video.
Okay, the final step is now if I go back to my forked repository on GitHub, we'll see this sync fork button that appears because the upstream repository has been modified. My pull request was merged. And so if I click sync fork, it tells me that this main branch on my repository is out of date because I just merged my changes from my branch into the main branch of the upstream repository. And so here I'm going to click on sync fork and I'm going to click update branch. Now the page is going to reload, but what we see what happened is it now tells me that this branch is up to date with the upstream repository. And I can navigate back over to GitHub Desktop and I can fetch any of these changes from origin. So I want to see this main branch update. So I'm going to go over to main branch and I'm going to fetch from origin, which as again, origin is my forked version of the repository. And once I click that fetch button, it shows that there's this new commit in the origin repository, which is my forked version, that my computer does not know about. And if I go back over to VS Code, for example, we can see that my read.markdown file does not show up here because I'm on the main branch and I haven't pulled this change down yet. However, as soon as I click on pull origin, if I navigate back over my VS Code, we see that this file that had gotten pull requested and approved is now back, and I'm all synced back up with the upstream repository.
All right, so now Reed as a contributor is ready to make a new contribution by repeating the process, checking out a new branch, pushing that up to his repository, making a pull request into the upstream repo, and the cycle can continue. And so this is the process of contributing to an open source repository.